My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I serve as the president of Burkina Faso. I am also a man who walks, doubts, listens, prays, and learns often in silence. I am speaking today to Muslims and Christians, to elders of the Sahel, to leaders who carry weight they rarely speak about, and to people across the world who still believe that God, conscience, and leadership are not separate things. Many of you are older than me. Many of you have seen leaders rise and fall. I ask only that you listen, not to be convinced, but to reflect. What I am about to share did not begin with politics. It began quietly after my baptism. The day itself was ordinary: water, prayer, stillness. I felt peace, the kind that does not shout. I returned to my routines. I worked. I spoke with people. I carried the same responsibilities. Nothing outward changed. But the night did. From the first night after baptism, something shifted. Daytime remained familiar, grounded in duty and decisions. Yet when darkness settled, when the room grew quiet and the lamp dim, I found myself entering places that felt strangely known. Sometimes I was in my room, exactly as it was. Other times I stood in places that returned again and again: an old church with worn stone, a narrow road swallowed by shadow, an empty field stretching farther than the eye could see, a river so still it seemed to listen back. None of these places frightened me at first. They felt like memories I could not name. My heart was calm, then curious. Confusion came slowly. Fear never shouted, it whispered. And beneath it all was another feeling, deeper and steadier, the sense of being awakened rather than attacked. I did not seek visions. I did not ask for signs. I did not speak of these things to anyone. What happened came on its own, night after night, repeating with patience, as if waiting for me to slow down enough to understand. This is not a story about becoming holy. It is a story about being corrected. I will stop here. The first change was not dramatic. It did not arrive with thunder or fear. It arrived with repetition. Each night, at the same hour, a white light appeared. It was never sudden. It did not flash or burn. It came gently, as if it had always been there and I was only now allowed to notice it. The room would remain exactly as it was: the walls, the chair, the quiet air, yet the light stood apart from all of it. It did not come from a lamp or a window. It had no clear source. I noticed the hour before I noticed the meaning. Night after night, without exception, the light arrived at the same time. I tested myself. I stayed awake on purpose. I distracted my mind. I prayed. I did nothing. It came anyway. Always patient, always unchanged. At first, I told myself it was imagination, fatigue, a mind adjusting after ritual. That explanation lasted only a short while. Then I began to notice the figure. At a distance, always far enough that I could not see a face, stood a human shape. It did not move closer. It did not raise a hand. It did not speak. It only watched, not with threat and not with comfort, simply with attention. That was what unsettled me. We are accustomed to being judged or praised. We are not accustomed to being seen without explanation. The figure did not ask me to kneel. It did not command. It did not accuse. It waited. Then came the sound. At first I thought it was the wind. Then I thought it was memory. Then I realized it was neither. It was a whisper that did not enter through my ears but arrived already inside me. It spoke my name, not loudly, not urgently, as if someone reminding me that I existed. Sometimes the whisper formed words that felt like prayer. I recognized the rhythm, the humility, the surrender. Yet I knew with certainty that I had never learned these prayers. They did not belong to my education, my culture, or my habits. Still, my heart recognized them before my mind did. I did not repeat them aloud. I did not write them down. I listened. In the mornings I woke with strange physical traces. Warmth remained in my chest, exactly where the heart rests, as if a hand had been placed there and removed only moments before waking. My palms tingled faintly, like skin that had touched something both gentle and powerful. I searched for medical reasons. I found none that satisfied the pattern. The dreams deepened. I began to see moments that had not yet occurred, faces I had not yet met, crowds where I stood among people. Yet I was not the same man I knew myself to be. I was quieter, less defended, more exposed. Then came the night when the dream did not end. I opened my eyes and the room was still full of the same presence. The light did not fade, the sound did not retreat. The boundary between sleep and waking dissolved without warning. That was the moment I understood something that changed the way I approached everything afterward. This was not imagination. This was not fear. This was not a message meant to impress. This was something opened after baptism, not to elevate me, but to confront me. And I understood, with clarity that carried no excitement, only gravity. This was not happening to make me special. It was happening to make me honest. That is where the real work began. After many nights, something in me softened. Not the visions, not the sounds, me. At first, I believed that seeing more meant understanding more. I believed that repetition was a sign that answers were coming soon, that clarity would arrive like a door opening all at once. This was the habit of a modern mind, the same habit that pushes leaders to explain before they have listened. The nights corrected that habit slowly. The images repeated, but they did not explain themselves. The light came, but it did not reveal instructions. The presence remained distant, refusing to perform. And the more I tried to interpret quickly, the heavier everything felt. Confusion grew when I chased meaning. Peace returned when I stopped. One night, exhausted by my own effort to understand, I did nothing. I did not analyze. I did not pray for answers. I did not rehearse explanations for myself. I simply observed, like a man watching rain without trying to count the drops. That night, the light felt gentler. The whisper did not grow louder, but it became clearer not in words but in intention. I realized then that what I was experiencing was not meant to be solved. It was meant to shape me through patience. Human beings want conclusions. Faith does not move that way. The old lessons repeated themselves without hurry. They taught me something ancient that leaders often forget the moment they gain authority. Knowledge that arrives too fast becomes pride, not wisdom. The soul cannot be rushed without tearing. The more I forced interpretation, the more restless I became. The nights grew heavy, my thoughts tangled. I woke tired, not refreshed. Only when I accepted, not knowing, did the atmosphere change. Silence became a form of listening. Humility became a form of understanding. I began to see that the nights were not adding information. They were removing noise. They were sanding down the sharp edges of certainty I did not deserve. There is an old way of knowing that does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It settles only when a person stops trying to be impressive, even to themselves. I learned to hold what I saw without announcing it in my heart. I learned to let the images pass without judgment. And slowly, the fear dissolved, replaced by something steadier, correction without condemnation. I understood then that not everything revealed is meant to be immediately understood. Some truths insist on waiting until the person becomes small enough to carry them safely. This lesson reached beyond the night. In leadership, impatience destroys more than enemies ever could. When a leader rushes to explain, to justify, to declare certainty, he confuses movement with direction. He mistakes noise for progress. The nights taught me restraint. They taught me that seeing without boasting, knowing without announcing, and waiting without demanding are forms of discipline older than any modern institution. The ancient path teaches, know but do not display, see but do not rush to judge. Only when I practiced this did the experiences lose their weight and gain their meaning. I realized then that the nights were not meant to frighten me. They were meant to repair something broken long before baptism, the human urge to control understanding rather than submit to formation. That realization did not arrive with joy. It arrived with relief, because for the first time, I stopped trying to master what was happening to me. And in that surrender, the nights became lighter, quieter, and more honest. This was not revelation as spectacle. It was discipline as mercy. For a long time, I carried a quiet misunderstanding. I believed that baptism would lift me, that it would place me on steadier ground than before, that afterward I would feel cleaner, calmer, perhaps even stronger than other men. What came instead was exposure. The nights did not show me angels or victories. They showed me myself without defenses. Fears I believed I had outgrown returned in subtle ways, not as panic, but as hesitation. Pride I never named stood quietly in the corner, not loud enough to embarrass me, but present enough to shape my reactions. Old habits I thought were buried appeared again, not to accuse, but to ask whether I truly understood them. The light did not flatter me. It illuminated what I avoided during the day. I realized something difficult and freeing at the same time. Baptism does not make a person higher, it makes a person visible to themselves first. It removes the covering we place over our weaknesses and calls that holiness. The nights peeled me open layer by layer. I saw how often I mistook control for strength, how easily I confused decisiveness with righteousness, how quickly I judged others while excusing myself in silence. None of this was shouted at me. It was simply revealed and left there, waiting for my response. Light, I learned, does not always comfort. Sometimes it exposes too clearly. A person who refuses to look inward will eventually be blinded by the very truth they claim to follow. That is not punishment, it is consequence. Faith does not raise us above our humanity. It strips away the illusions we built to survive it. The more honestly I faced what the nights showed me, the less threatening they became. Fear diminished not because I was protected from myself, but because I stopped lying to myself. This lesson extended far beyond personal faith. In leadership, people often seek spiritual language to appear elevated. They speak of calling, destiny, and blessing while avoiding confession, restraint, and correction. But power magnifies what already exists. If pride lives beneath the surface, authority brings it forward. If fear hides quietly, leadership gives it a stage. The Knights taught me that no ritual, no title, no public praise can hide a man from what he truly is. Only humility allows a person to stand in light without being consumed by it. Baptism did not make me better than others. It made me accountable. And accountability, I learned, is the beginning of real change, not its reward. There were nights when I wanted to tell everything. I would wake before dawn, with my heart still warm, my mind still full, and a strange urgency rising inside me. The human instinct appeared immediately, to explain, to share, to be understood, to confirm that what I experienced was real by placing it in someone else's hands. I resisted at first out of caution. Then I resisted out of fear. Finally, I resisted out of understanding. I noticed something subtle. The more I prepared words in my head, the thinner the experience became. The more I rehearsed how I would describe the light, the presence, the prayer I had never learned, the more distant it all felt the following night. It was as if the experience withdrew the moment I tried to claim it. Silence, on the other hand, preserved it. I began to understand that some things remain alive only when they are not displayed. The sacred does not like to be used. It does not tolerate being turned into proof, identity, or advantage. I realized that speaking too soon was not humility, it was hunger. Hunger to be affirmed. Hunger to be recognized. Hunger to be seen as someone who had touched something beyond others. That hunger corrodes the very thing it seeks to protect. There is a temptation, especially for those in public life, to convert inner experience into outward authority, to imply that closeness to God grants superiority of judgment. That temptation is quiet, polite, and extremely dangerous. The Knights warned me without words. What is real does not need advertisement. What is deep does not rush toward the surface. What is true survives silence. I learned that the experience remained only when I refused to turn it into a story that made me special. It stayed when I did not use it to win arguments, to inspire admiration, or to elevate my own voice above others. Some truths are meant to shape conduct, not conversation. The old wisdom returned to me with clarity. What is loud often empties itself quickly, while what is quiet endures. Noise creates followers. Stillness forms character. This restraint became a discipline. I learned to carry what I had seen without displaying it, to let it correct me privately rather than impress others publicly. In leadership, this lesson is rarely learned early. Leaders are rewarded for speech, not silence. They are praised for declarations, not restraint. Yet the most dangerous leaders are those who cannot keep anything sacred inside themselves. When everything must be said, nothing remains holy. I understood then that discretion is not secrecy, it is respect. It is the refusal to reduce what is sacred into currency for influence. That choice to keep some things unspoken protected me more than any explanation ever could. And the Knights remained. There came a point when the question inside me changed. At first I asked myself what the Knights meant. Later, I asked myself why they came. Eventually, a quieter and more demanding question replaced both. How was I living afterward? I realized that the visions, the light, the whispers, the strange certainty of being seen were not tests of belief. They were tests of behavior. They were not measuring how much I could perceive, but how much I was willing to change. I began to notice small things during the day. I noticed how quickly irritation rose when someone disagreed with me. I noticed how easily authority made my voice firmer than necessary. I noticed moments when I could have listened longer but chose efficiency instead. None of these were crimes. All of them were indicators. The Knights did not ask me to remember what I saw. They asked me to become less sharp with people who stood in front of me. I understood something essential then. The sacred is not proven by experience, it is revealed by consequence. If what a person encounters does not soften them, it does not come from a place meant to heal. So I began to watch myself instead of the visions. Was I slower to anger? Was I more patient with those who struggled to explain themselves? Was I willing to step back instead of insisting on being right? These were not dramatic changes, they were small and unremarkable. But they accumulated. I found myself pausing before speaking, not because I feared mistakes, but because I recognized weight. Words carry more than intention. They carry impact. The Knights had made that impossible to ignore. I learned to yield space in conversation, To allow silence to do some of the work I once believed leadership required me to do alone. I learned that gentleness is not weakness when it is chosen deliberately. Faith, I realized, does not announce itself through extraordinary events. It reveals itself through ordinary restraint. If a person claims deep spiritual experience yet grows harsher, more impatient, more self-important, something has gone wrong. Light that does not produce kindness is not light that restores. This understanding was humbling because it removed any temptation to measure my faith by intensity. What mattered was consistency. What mattered was whether those closest to me felt safer, not smaller. I understood then that the nights were not asking to be remembered, they were asking to be translated into daily conduct, quiet decisions, and unnoticed restraint. That realization grounded everything. It returned me fully to the world, not as someone who had seen more, but as someone responsible to live better. As the nights continued, another understanding settled into me, slowly and without drama. I saw that light does not gather crowds. The brightest light I encountered never pointed outward. It never searched for witnesses. It never circled above me like a crown. Instead, it pressed inward, toward the place where excuses are born and justified. That was uncomfortable. I had grown up, like many who later carry authority, watching leaders surround themselves with admiration. I had seen how applause can become armor, how titles can become shelter, how public reverence can soften the discomfort of private doubt. It is easy to believe that leadership requires this glow, that authority must look elevated to remain respected. The nights dismantled that belief. They showed me that light aimed at the crowd blinds everyone, including the leader. But light aimed at the conscience burns away illusion without spectacle. The second kind of light is the one most leaders avoid because it offers no applause. I began to understand why some men cling to constant affirmation, why they need ceremonies, slogans, and devotion, why questions unsettle them more than enemies. When a person depends on recognition to feel secure, truth becomes a threat. The nights did not accuse, they reminded. They showed me that the most dangerous moment for any leader is not opposition but adoration. Praise dulls awareness, silence sharpens it. I saw clearly that when a leader begins to fear questions, the light has already turned into fire. When criticism is treated as betrayal, authority has begun to rot from within. When a man cannot bear to be unseen, he no longer knows who he is without the crowd. This realization changed how I approached power. I learned to value the moments when no cameras were present, to pay attention to how I behaved when nothing was being recorded, to ask myself whether my conduct would remain the same if no one ever knew what choice I made. The nights taught me that people do not trust speeches as deeply as they trust patterns. They watch how a leader treats those who cannot reward him. They listen to how he speaks when frustration arrives. They observe whether humility survives success. A leader who depends on glory will eventually sacrifice truth to preserve image. A leader who does not need it can afford to remain honest. This lesson extended beyond me. It spoke to all who carry responsibility, whether in government, religion, or community. Authority does not require elevation, it requires alignment. When conscience and conduct separate, no amount of light can save the structure built on them. I understood then that leadership is not proven on stages, it is tested in private decisions that no one applauds and few ever see. That is where the real measure lies. As the nights continued, the focus shifted again. What I was shown was no longer only about my inner life. It widened. It touched responsibility. It pressed against authority. It asked questions that could not be answered with intention alone. I began to understand that power is not a reward, it is an examination. There is a dangerous misunderstanding in the world that leadership is given because someone is strong, intelligent, or deserving. What the nights taught me was harder to accept. Sometimes power is given precisely to test whether a person can remain upright while standing higher than others. Height reveals balance. I saw with painful clarity that many are not destroyed by enemies or failure. They are undone by comfort, by distance, by the slow separation from ordinary life. When power arrives, it does not create new flaws. It amplifies the ones already present. I saw how easy it is for a leader to speak in the name of the people while quietly drifting away from them. How sacrifice becomes a word rather than a practice. How fear of losing position can slowly replace devotion to truth. These realizations were not abstract. My country has suffered under leaders who spoke of the people while living far above them. Leaders who promised sacrifice while protecting their own safety. Leaders who claimed to serve but feared losing the chair more than losing the trust of those beneath them. The nights did not allow me to look away from this history. They showed me that a person unwilling to share hardship before gaining authority will not suddenly embrace honesty after gaining it. Power does not convert character, it exposes it. This understanding changed how I viewed responsibility. I stopped asking whether decisions would preserve strength. I began asking whether they preserved integrity. I asked whether I was willing to feel discomfort alongside the people affected by my choices, or whether I sought insulation through status. The nights reminded me that leadership detached from suffering becomes management, not service. When leaders no longer feel the weight of ordinary life, their decisions lose moral gravity. I learned that authority tests patience, restraint, humility, and courage all at once. It tests whether a person can say no to advantage, delay gratification, and accept correction without humiliation. Power does not ask loudly, it whispers temptations that feel reasonable. The nights taught me to listen for those whispers. They taught me that a leader who avoids hardship will eventually avoid truth. And a leader who avoids truth will justify anything to protect their position. I understood then that remaining close to the people is not symbolic, it is protective. It guards the soul of the one who governs as much as it serves the governed. Power, I learned, is the heaviest test because it offers comfort as camouflage. And only those willing to remain uncomfortable for the sake of conscience can pass it without losing themselves. As the nights deepened, I noticed something unsettling. The images no longer pointed toward guns, borders, or enemies marching from afar. They turned inward, toward quieter dangers, toward forces that do not announce themselves with violence, but with permission. I understood then that the most dangerous enemies are rarely external. The visions showed decay, not invasion. They showed nations hollowed out long before any attack arrived. They showed leaders standing firm against foreign pressure while quietly surrendering to greed, pride, and deception within their own walls. I saw that collapse does not begin with defeat. It begins with justification. A man tells himself one small lie to protect efficiency, then another to preserve stability, then another to avoid embarrassment. Over time, the lie becomes policy, and policy becomes habit. By the time the structure falls, no one remembers where the first crack appeared. The nights made this impossible to ignore. They reminded me that a country rots inward before it is broken outward. Weapons do not destroy nations as efficiently as arrogance. Sanctions do not weaken a people as deeply as corruption normalized and excused. I saw clearly that when leaders focus only on external threats, they often do so to avoid confronting internal decay. It is easier to blame foreign forces than to admit that discipline has collapsed at home. The visions did not accuse any one nation. They spoke a universal truth. Every society that loses its moral center begins by dismissing small compromises, small theft, small cruelty, small dishonesty. Over time, these grow into systems that no longer feel wrong because everyone participates. The nights taught me that guarding a nation begins with guarding conscience. If greed is tolerated, it spreads. If pride is celebrated, it hardens. If deception is excused, it multiplies. No army can defend a people from themselves once this process is complete. I understood then that leadership is not primarily about confronting enemies. It is about resisting decay. It is about setting limits when shortcuts become tempting and refusing comfort when it requires silence in the face of wrongdoing. The nights forced me to ask questions that power often avoids. Was I vigilant against corruption, even when it benefited those close to me? Was I willing to confront dishonesty even when it threatened unity? Was I guarding integrity with the same urgency that others guard borders? I realized that strength without discipline becomes cruelty. Unity without truth becomes manipulation. Loyalty without conscience becomes destruction. The ancient lesson returned again. To protect land, one must protect people. To protect people, one must protect moral order. When the inner structure collapses, the outer structure follows inevitably. The nights did not offer solutions. They offered responsibility. They reminded me that the most dangerous enemy is not visible, not loud, and not foreign. It lives wherever power is used without restraint and ambition is justified without humility. This lesson was sobering because it left no one else to blame. As the nights continued, the message became sharper, almost stern, yet never angry. I began to understand that one of the greatest dangers to a people is not bad leadership alone, but blind devotion. The visions did not place crowns on anyone's head. They did the opposite. They pulled them down. I was shown, again and again, that no human being is built to carry worship. Even the most sincere leader remains human. Even the most disciplined heart still stumbles. When a people lift a man too high, they remove the ground that keeps him honest. This truth unsettled me more than any other. I saw how admiration can quietly become protection, how loyalty can silence necessary correction, how respect, when unchecked, turns into fear of speaking truth. A leader surrounded by praise eventually stops hearing reality. The nights made one thing clear. When people stop holding their leaders to moral standards, they do not help them, they destroy them. I understood then why history repeats itself so painfully. A leader begins with humility. The people respond with trust. Over time, trust becomes reverence. Reverence becomes silence. Silence becomes permission. And permission becomes corruption, not always in money or power, but in judgment. I saw that blind loyalty is not love. It is abandonment disguised as devotion. True support is demanding. It asks leaders to remain accountable. It insists on standards even when affection is strong. It refuses to excuse wrongdoing for the sake of unity. The knights warned me not to accept elevation beyond correction. They reminded me that when a leader is no longer questioned, he is no longer guided. When criticism disappears, wisdom soon follows. A man who is never challenged begins to believe his own image. I learned something important for myself. If I ever reached a point where people were afraid to remind me of limits, afraid to name mistakes, afraid to hold me to the same moral line as everyone else, then I would already be lost whether I realized it or not. Leadership is not strengthened by adoration, it is strengthened by accountability. This lesson was not only for those in power, it was also for the people. To care for a leader is not to shield him from truth, it is to insist that he remain worthy of trust. A society that refuses to correct its leaders eventually inherits their failures. The knights taught me that the highest respect a people can offer is not silence but honesty, not worship but responsibility. And the most faithful leaders are those who welcome it. As I come to the end of this account, I want to be clear about one thing. I did not share these knights to be believed, I shared them to be weighed. I am speaking to Muslims and Christians, to elders of the Sahel, to leaders across nations, and to people who still hold Jesus close to their hearts, even when the world grows loud and impatient. Many of you have lived long enough to know that the most important truths rarely arrive with celebration. They arrive quietly, asking to be carried with care. What I experienced did not remove me from the world. It returned me to it with greater responsibility. I learned that faith is not proven by what we see in the dark, but by how we walk in the light of ordinary days. I learned that leadership is not measured by applause, but by restraint when no one is watching. I learned that power is safest in the hands of those who remain uncomfortable using it. To the people of Africa, I say this with humility. Our future will not be secured by anger alone, nor by pride disguised as strength. It will be secured by discipline, integrity, and leaders willing to live close to the truth, even when it costs them comfort. A continent does not rise by shouting its pain, it rises by healing its habits. To the world beyond Africa, I say this without accusation, do not mistake noise for wisdom or speed for progress. The world is tired not because it lacks information, but because it lacks patience. We have learned how to connect everything except conscience. To Muslims and Christians, I speak carefully and with respect. Faith was never meant to be a weapon or a performance. It was meant to shape the inner life so that outer power does not corrupt it. When belief no longer produces humility, something has gone wrong. When devotion no longer softens the heart, it has been misused. To leaders everywhere, including myself, I offer this warning as a brother, not a judge. If you cannot accept correction, you are not ready for authority. If you fear questions, you fear truth. And if you protect your image more fiercely than your conscience, power will eventually expose you. What the knights taught me is simple and difficult at the same time. Return to what is right. Release what is corrupt. Refuse what dehumanizes. No nation collapses all at once. It collapses when small wrongs are defended long enough to become normal. No leader falls suddenly. He falls when he stops listening, long before the consequences arrive. There is still time. Time to choose restraint over revenge. Time to choose integrity over advantage. Time to choose humility over pride dressed as certainty. I hope for peace, not only between nations, but within them. I hope for leaders who fear wrongdoing more than they fear losing power. I hope for communities that hold their leaders accountable without hatred and support them without blindness. I hope for Africa to walk upright, not resentful, not submissive, but grounded in dignity and discipline. I hope for a world that remembers that strength without conscience is only force, and faith without character is only language. I do not claim perfection. I do not claim special access to truth. I claim only responsibility for what I have learned and the duty to live by it as honestly as I can. Let me say this plainly, not to elevate myself, but to stand by my words. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I speak these words in truth as I understand it. I am Ibrahim Traoré, serving my country, and what I have shared comes from conviction, not performance. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I say these things not to be followed blindly, but to be considered carefully. If these reflections stirred something in you, sit with them. If they challenged you, do not rush to defend or dismiss. Let them work quietly, the way real change always does. And if you believe conversations like this still matter in a world that moves too fast, stay present, listen, reflect, share your thoughts with others who are willing to think deeply rather than react quickly. Walk with us if you choose, not in noise, but in conscience.